He walked into my kitchen on a Tuesday morning, poured himself a cup of coffee from the pot I had just made, and told me I needed to start knocking before I came downstairs. My own kitchen, my own coffee, my house that I had paid off 11 years ago with money I saved from 32 years of work as a school administrator. I remember standing there holding a dish towel, still damp from wiping the counter, and I just looked at him, my son-in-law, my daughter's husband of 3 years, the man who had moved into my home 8 months earlier because, as my daughter Renata explained it, they were transitioning between apartments, between jobs, between one version of their life and the next. I had said yes because Renata was my daughter and I did not know how to say no to her. His name was Derek. He was 38 years old, broad-shouldered, good-looking in a way he was very aware of, and he had never once, not a single time in the 8 months he lived under my roof, offered to pay a utility bill. "I'm serious, Loretta," he said, using my name the way young people do when they want to make a point of not calling you ma'am. "We need our space in the mornings." I folded the dish towel, I set it on the counter by the sink, and I said, "This is my kitchen, Derek." He looked at me over the rim of my mug, my favorite mug, the blue one with the chip on the handle that my late husband bought me from a shop in Savannah, and he said, "Look, we appreciate everything you do, but you being down here at 6 in the morning makes Renata anxious. She feels like she can't relax in her own home." Her own home? I did not say anything else. I went upstairs to my room, sat on the edge of my bed, and I stared at the window for a long time. The oak tree in the backyard was just starting to turn. It was October, and the light was thin and gold through the leaves, and I thought about my husband, who had planted that tree the year we moved in, when our daughter was still small enough to carry on his shoulder. I thought about how he would have handled this. And then I thought, I am 64 years old. I own this house. I have a master's degree. I ran a school district of 1,100 students. And I just got told to knock before entering my own kitchen. I want to tell you something before I go further. I am not a woman who gives herself to conflict easily. I was raised in Georgia by a woman who believed that grace was the highest form of strength, and I have tried to live that way my whole life. When my husband passed 7 years ago now, a Tuesday in March, which is why Tuesdays still carry a particular weight for me, I did not fall apart. I organized the funeral. I paid the bills. I kept the house. I helped Renata through her grief. I kept going because that is what I knew how to do. And somewhere in all that keeping going, I think I forgot to keep myself. That was how Derek got as far as he did, not because I was weak, because I kept choosing peace over confrontation, and I had confused the two for too long. They had moved in on a Wednesday in February, just the two of them and a carload of bags. Renata had called 3 days before, voice careful the way it gets when she already knows she's asking too much. She and Derek had given up their apartment. The new place they'd been counting on had fallen through. Could they stay for a little while, just until they found something? I said yes. I cleared out the guest room. I put clean towels on the rack and moved my sewing things to the closet. I told myself it would be 2 months, maybe 3. Renata was my daughter. Of course I said yes. The first few weeks were fine. Renata helped with dishes sometimes. Derek was quiet, mostly. He worked from home. Consulting, he called it, though I never saw evidence of any particular client. And he kept to the upstairs during the day. I cooked dinner 3 or 4 times a week. I did not ask them to contribute to groceries. I figured it would work itself out. It did not work itself out. By April, Derek had started leaving his things in the living room, his laptop on the coffee table, his shoes by the front door, his protein powder on the kitchen counter next to my flour canister. Small things. I mentioned it once gently, and he said sorry without looking up from his phone. Nothing changed. By May, he had started commenting on how I kept the house. Not aggressively, just casually, the way someone talks about a shared space. You know, they say plants in the bathroom cause humidity problems. This carpet in the hallway is pretty worn. Have you thought about replacing it? The Wi-Fi router placement is actually suboptimal. I could move it. I let all of it pass. What I should have done, and I say this knowing it now clearly, is that I should have sat them both down in May and said, "Here are the terms. Here is what I need from you financially. Here is how long this arrangement lasts. Here is how long this arrangement lasts. Here is how we respect each other while it does." I did not do that. I told myself I didn't want to make Renata feel unwelcome in her mother's home. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself that love meant not keeping score. By July, he was talking over me at dinner. By August, he had stopped saying good morning. By September, when my friend Cecile came to visit for a long weekend, he had disappeared upstairs both days. She was there without a word of greeting, and when Renata apologized for him, she called it his way of recharging. Cecile looked at me across the table with an expression I recognized, the look of a person watching something they cannot say out loud. After Cecile left, I sat in the backyard for a long time. I watched the oak tree. I thought about what I was allowing. I had a conversation with myself that I should have had months earlier, but I was not quite ready to act on it yet. The kitchen morning was in October. 2 days after that, I came home from my Tuesday morning walk to find Derek had rearranged the living room. He had pushed my armchair, the one that had been in that corner for 19 years, the one my husband used to read in, against the wall to make more room for his gaming setup, wires running across the floor, a large monitor on the side table I used for my books. I stood in the doorway. Renata came in behind me. She saw my face. She said, "Mom, we just needed more space in here. It was getting cramped." "That chair has been in that corner since 1999, I said. I said it quietly. "Your father sat in that chair every Sunday morning." She looked at the floor, and Derek from the kitchen called out, "It's just furniture, Loretta." I went to my room. I did not come back downstairs that evening. I sat at my desk and I wrote in my journal for a long time, something I have done since I was in my 30s, during hard seasons, and I wrote down every incident I could remember, all of it. The coffee mug, the counters, the Wi-Fi router, the rearranged furniture, the tone of voice, the disappearing whenever my friends came over, the 8 months of unpaid anything. I wrote it all down, and then I looked at it. It was not nothing. Taken together, it was a very clear picture of a man who had decided that my home belonged to him. I called Cecile. I said, "I need to ask you something honestly." She said, "I've been waiting for this call." I asked her what she saw when she was here in September. She told me, not unkindly but completely. She said, "Loretta, you are disappearing in your own home. I watched you apologize twice at dinner. For what? I still don't know." I was quiet for a moment. She said, "What are you going to do?" I told her I was going to make a phone call in the morning. I want to tell you about the phone call because it is the part of this story I am most proud of. Not because it was dramatic, because it was not. I had a former colleague, we had worked together for 12 years before she retired, who had gone on to work for a legal aid organization in our county. Her name was Harriet, but not the Harriet in the list of people I know well. She is a woman I trust in the way you trust someone who has seen you make hard decisions under pressure and watched you make them well. I called her at 9 in the morning. I explained the situation without editorializing. She listened. Then she said, "Loretta, I want to be clear with you about something. They are guests in your home. They have no legal tenancy because no lease was signed, no rent was paid, and the arrangement was informal and open-ended. You have options, but you need to think about which path you want to take." She walked me through what I could do. I will not go into every detail because the specifics were particular to my state, but what I understood by the end of that call was this: I had more authority in my own situation than I had been acting like I had. I had rights, and I had allowed those rights to go unexercised for 8 months because I was trying to be gracious. Harriet said something before we hung up that I wrote down in my journal. She said, "Grace is not the same as surrender. You can be kind and still require people to respect what is yours." I sat with that for the rest of the day. The following Monday, I asked Renata to have a conversation with me. Just the two of us. I chose Monday because Derek had a standing lunch that day, and I knew we would have the house to ourselves. We sat at the kitchen table. I poured us both coffee. I kept my voice level. I told Renata that I loved her. I told her that nothing about that was conditional or up for debate. I told her that having her close had been meaningful to me since her father passed, more than she probably knew. And then I told her that the current arrangement was not working, that I felt I had not been respected in my own space, and I gave her specific examples, not an emotional list, just clear facts. The chair, the kitchen comment, the pattern of behavior over 8 months. Renata's face did the thing it does when she is trying not to feel something. She looked at the table. She said, "Mom, he's not trying to be disrespectful. That's just how he is." I said, "I understand that, and I'm telling you that how he is does not work in my home." She said, "So what are you saying?" I said, "I'm saying that I need you both to have a move-out date. I think 90 days is fair. That gives you time to find a proper place, and during those 90 days, I need different behavior in this house." The silence was heavy. She said, "I can't believe you're doing this." I said, "I've been doing this for 8 months. I'm finally saying it out loud." She stood up from the table. She said she needed to talk to Derek. She went upstairs. I sat in the kitchen. I drank my coffee. I looked out the window at the backyard, at the oak tree, at the light coming through the turning leaves. My hands were not shaking. I had expected them to shake. They were steady. What happened over the next 2 days was not pleasant. Derek came downstairs that evening and he was not quiet. He was not loud either. He was the kind of controlled angry that is somehow worse than shouting. He said I was being unreasonable. He said I had never actually communicated any of this. He said that Renata was upset and that I was damaging their marriage by putting pressure on her. I let him finish. I said, "I've given you a 90-day notice. I think that's fair." He said, "You can't just kick us out." I said, "I'm not kicking you out. I'm giving you time to make other arrangements. There is a difference." He walked out of the kitchen. I heard him on the phone for a long time that night. I heard Renata crying at one point quietly, and that part was the hardest. She is my daughter, and I do not enjoy being the cause of her pain. But I had started to understand that what I had been doing, saying nothing, allowing everything, had not actually protected her from pain. It had just postponed it and added mine to the account. The next morning I called Harriet again. I told her what had happened. She helped me put together a written notice, not hostile, not legal sounding in an aggressive way, just clear, a letter stating the terms of the transition. A move-out, date 90 days from then, contact information for local housing resources. I slid it under their bedroom door that afternoon. I did not expect what happened next. 2 days after I delivered the letter, there was a knock at my front door. I opened it to find a man I did not recognize. He was in his 50s, neat, wearing a collared shirt and carrying a leather folder. He introduced himself as an acquaintance of Derek's, some kind of informal advisor, he said. He wanted to talk to me about the letter. He said Derek felt the timeline was unfair. He said Renata was distressed. He said he hoped we could come to an arrangement that worked for everyone. I asked him if he was an attorney. He said he was not. I said, "Then I don't have anything to discuss with you." He blinked. He was not expecting that. I said it kindly. Genuinely kindly. I am not a hard woman. But I had spent 8 months being soft in the wrong direction, and I was done. He left. I called Harriet and told her. She laughed in a way that made me laugh too. She said, "Good, you're doing this right." The 90 days passed. Not smoothly. There were difficult weeks, cold evenings, meals eaten at different times, Renata and I moving around each other with a careful sadness that I think we both knew was temporary. There were 2 conversations that went poorly. There was one evening where Renata sat with me on the back porch and cried and told me she didn't understand how it had gotten to this, and I held her hand and told her I loved her and also that I needed my home back. Both things were true. They did not cancel each other out. Derek found an apartment in the 7th week. I know because Renata told me on a Sunday evening when he was out, and her voice was quiet, and I could hear under the words that something in her was relieved too, even if she was not ready to say that yet. They moved out on a Saturday. Derek carried boxes past me without speaking. Renata hugged me at the door for a long time. She did not say anything, neither did I. The hug said enough. I spent that afternoon putting the living room back the way it had always been. I moved my armchair to its corner. I put my books back on the side table. I took Derek's protein powder from the kitchen counter and put it in a bag by the front door in case they forgot it. They did not come back for it. That evening, I made myself dinner. Nothing elaborate. A piece of salmon, some rice, a glass of the wine I liked that I had stopped buying because Derek had made a comment once about the brand. I set my own table. I ate in my own dining room. I watched the evening news in my armchair with the volume at exactly the level I preferred. The quiet was different than it had been before they arrived. Before, it was ordinary quiet, the kind you live inside without noticing. This was the quiet of something returned, of space that had been reclaimed. Renata and I talk now. It was not immediate. There were 2 months where calls were short and careful. But we talk. She has not said much about Derek, and I have not asked. What I know is that she is in her own place, making her own decisions, and when she calls me, she sounds, slowly, more like herself. She came for Sunday dinner last month. She sat in her father's chair for a while before we ate, without being asked to, the way you sit in a chair that belongs to someone you miss. I did not say anything. I went to the kitchen to finish cooking, and I let her have that. I want to say something before I finish, to anyone who may be in a version of what I was in. You do not have to wait until you are erased before you speak. I waited too long, and I know it. I told myself I was being loving. But there is a kind of love that has no edges, and it is not actually love. It is fear, wearing love's clothing. Fear of conflict. Fear of being seen as difficult. Fear of losing someone if you ask them to treat you with basic dignity. Your home is the place in the world that should feel most like yours. If it does not, if you have slowly been made to feel like a guest in your own space, that is not your fault, but it is your responsibility to address it. Gently first, clearly always. You do not need to be angry to be firm. You do not need to make enemies to have standards, and you do not need anyone's permission to reclaim what has always been yours. I sat in my chair that evening with my wine and the news and the oak tree just visible through the window in the last of the light, and I was home in a way I had not been for a long time. Not the loud kind of home, the steady kind, the kind that holds. I think about that dish towel a lot, the way I folded it, set it down on the counter without a word, and walked upstairs. At the time, I told myself I was being the bigger person. Looking back, I think I was just still in the habit of making myself small. That is the honest part of this story that I have had to sit with. Derek did not arrive in my home already knowing he could run it. I taught him that, not with words, with silence. Every time I let a comment pass, every time I rearranged my own schedule around his comfort, every time I chose not to say the thing that needed to be said, I was teaching him that the boundaries of my home were negotiable, that I was negotiable. There is a cause and effect to how these situations unfold, and it rarely happens all at once. It is slow, it is incremental, and by the time you see the full picture, you have already been living inside it for months. What I had to reckon with was not just what Derek did, it was what I had allowed, and why. I told myself I was being gracious. I told myself I was protecting my relationship with Renata. But if I am truly honest, I was also afraid. Afraid of being seen as difficult. Afraid that asking for basic respect would cost me my daughter's love. That fear was not wisdom. It was just fear, and I had been dressing it up in the language of kindness for a long time. What changed things for me was not anger. It was clarity. The moment I sat at my desk and wrote it all down, every incident, in plain language without excusing any of it, I could see it for what it was. And once you see something clearly, you cannot unsee it. That clarity is a form of intelligence that no one can give you. You have to arrive at it yourself. And you have to be willing to look at the parts that reflect back on your own choices, not just on the other person's behavior. Acting on that clarity took something different. It took the willingness to have a hard conversation with my daughter at a table where I loved her and still held the line. To deliver a letter under a bedroom door, knowing it would not be received warmly. To open my front door to a stranger who came to pressure me and simply say, "No, I am not a confrontational person." But I have learned that firmness and conflict are not the same thing. You can be warm and still be immovable. You can love someone and still require them to treat you with dignity. Loretta, the woman I am telling you about, the woman I was 8 months into that arrangement, she had all of this in her already. The decency to be fair, the sense to know when something had gone wrong, the backbone to do something about it once she finally decided to. None of it was new. It was just buried under a long season of keeping the peace at her own expense. What I want you to take from this is not a blueprint for confrontation. It is permission to trust what you already know. When something in your home, your life, your space, the place that is supposed to be yours, starts to feel like it belongs to someone else, that feeling is not an overreaction. It is information. The question is what you choose to do with it. The oak tree is still there. I can see it from my chair.